So without wasting any time, let's just go ahead and get started. And as far as today's agenda is concerned, we'll talk about AWS RDS. And before we go ahead and talk about this, let me just go ahead and give you a brief introduction about myself. As you all know, my name is Anuj. My total overall experience is around 22 years. As far as my training experience is concerned, it's around 15 plus years. I am a Microsoft certified trainer, also an AWS certified instructor, plus at the same time, I'm working on my GCP, which is, Google Cloud, which is the new player in the market. So this is about me. Apart from, one second, someone is saying, yeah, okay. Apart from the training, I have been involved in a lot of migrations. So I'm working as a cloud architect along with this, helping people move to the cloud. So I'm responsible for the assessment piece. I'm responsible for the migration piece, and of course, the foundation build. That is what we do. So that's more of a cloud architect role, which I am responsible for. So this is a quick introduction about myself. And let's just go ahead and get started. So as far as today's agenda is concerned, that talks about AWS and talks about RDS, which is my relational database service. The whole webinar is approximately 45 minutes, and we keep 15 minutes for questions in case anyone has any questions. So we started 15 minutes late, so maybe we'll be extending by 15 minutes, you can say. So 45 minutes to 50 minutes will be the webinar, and then 10 minutes, 15 minutes we'll keep for any questions in case you have, right? Now, first things first, before we go ahead and start, let's try to understand where does my database fits in? Where does the RDS database fits in? And then, of course, I'll talk about DynamoDB. Not in much, but I'll just give you a brief introduction of DynamoDB, and then we'll move on to a few slides which I have for my RDS, right? Now, first things first, when you talk about the base of cloud, so any cloud is sitting on a hypervisor. So in case of Amazon also, we talk about it sitting on a hypervisor. So in case of Amazon, the underlying layer is, if I'm not wrong, KVM. On top of this, we have something called a cloud fabric. In case of Amazon, this cloud fabric is based on OpenStack. I'm sure you might have heard of OpenStack some point in time. So Amazon has their own version of OpenStack, right? So now when you talk about this cloud fabric is there to control three different things. Controls my storage, controls my compute, and controls my network, right? Now on top of this, we have a layer which is my API layer, which basically interacts with the cloud fabric. So in other words, when you go ahead and interact, or let's say when you go ahead and talk about provisioning a machine, so in case of Amazon, we talk about EC2 instance. So if you want to go ahead and provision an EC2 instance, you will talk to this layer. Now this layer is the one which will then talk to this layer, which will provision my resource on hypervisor, right? So this is what happens. Now let's just talk about a few more things. So we already know that when you talk about cloud is divided into three different parts, or let's say types. We talk about IaaS, we talk about PaaS, and we talk about SaaS, right? So when you talk about IaaS, we can go ahead and talk to this API layer. Now, first things first, I forgot to mention, we can talk to this layer using Portal. We can talk to this layer using CLI, and of course, REST-based APIs. So you go ahead and talk to this layer and provision an EC2 instance, or in other words, in simpler terms, you go ahead and provision a VM. Once you go ahead and provision a VM, you can deploy a service on top of a VM, and then you go ahead and deploy your application APP1 on top, right? Now this is my IaaS because you have access on this, you can provision this, and you have access on this because of course you're deploying this. Now, second thing what we talk about is my PaaS. So when you talk about PaaS, we have an EC2 instance. Again, you go ahead and deploy a service, or let's say you have access on the service, and you go ahead and deploy your application app1. So in case of PaaS, we do not have access on this, we have access on this, and we have access on this. Now let's just move to SaaS and try to understand how this works. So we have EC2 instance, we have my service, and we have my application app1, and you have access on the app1. You do not have access on this, you do not have access on this, right? Now, you might have a question, why exactly I'm talking about IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, right? Because it's very important that we understand these three things, and then only we will be able to understand where exactly my database or my RDS resides, right? So when you talk about my RDS is a part of PaaS, so it's a PaaS service. Now let's just go ahead and talk about how do we go ahead and provision it otherwise. Normally, in the previous times, or let's say the on-prem world, we go ahead and have a virtual machine in place, and then you go ahead and deploy a database service with this. So this plus this gives me a database server, and then you have my database instance, which you can go ahead and get and connect your application to. So this is my on-prem world. Now in the new world, what we talk about is, this is first of all my cloud world. So in this, we talk about that we have an EC2 instance and we have a database layer on top. Of course, we have an operating system, I should say, I should not miss that. So we have the operating system layer. On top of this, we have a database layer, and then you go ahead and, or let's say Amazon goes ahead and provisions my databases, right? Now they give you access on one single database. This is this one, right? And this is my PaaS service, because you do not have access on this. You just have access on the database. And in case you want to go ahead and provision your application and connect the application server to this database, you can, right? Now, when you talk about this is my RDS, what we are talking about. This is a PaaS service, what we are talking about. And of course, if you want to go ahead and do this same thing on the cloud, you can go ahead and do that. Now, if you talk about that, so what you can do is you can provision an EC2 instance, install a database. Of course, there will be an operating system on this, install a database app on this, and of course, provision your databases, right? So when you talk about on-prem and you want to go ahead and do the same thing on cloud, you can do this. But then this is expensive. You have an overhead of managing your EC2 instance, your operating system, your database. So rather, people prefer going to a PaaS service. So when I say people prefer going to a PaaS service, they don't want to go ahead and take care of the EC2 instance, or maybe the operating system, or maybe the database. They just want to go ahead and access these databases and then use these databases with the application server, right? So this is something what we talk about is more like a new thing. You can also go ahead and provision my databases on the containers. So in containers, again, we have EC2 instances. And then of course, you can create containers on that. And on this, you can provision my databases. But then this is altogether a container, I would say. So we don't talk about this in this particular session. We focus on this part, which is a PaaS service. So we get access on this. Now, as far as Amazon is concerned, we have 6 types of databases which are supported. So we'll talk about that as we go on. Now, before we go ahead and talk about these things, let me just go ahead and also talk about the type of databases we have. Because, you know, in the newer world, we talk about NoSQL database, and we talk about my RDS or my SQL databases. So this is the categorization, what we do, right? Now, when you talk about NoSQL database or my RDS, we talk about these being separate services and they work separately, right? Now, this is pretty old technology. We have been using SQL servers, we have been using Oracle servers, DB2 servers since long, right? This is something which came few years back. The first service which was introduced was my Mongo, database. So MongoDB was my first service, right? Now the idea is the information when you talk about my NoSQL database is saved in a key value pair on a storage account, right? Now, when you talk about RDS, the same thing happens. Like I said, we have a VM, which is an EC2. Then you go ahead and have an operating system on the EC2. On top, we have database. And on top, we go ahead and provision my databases, right? So this is the new thing. I would not say new thing. It's been almost like 10 years, 10, 12 years since this is there in the market. And this is there since almost like 30 years or so. So this is the old thing what we talk about, right? Now, Amazon offers this and this as a service. Like I said, this is a PaaS service, and this is also a PaaS service. Now, there are a lot of benefits of using NoSQL. There are a lot of migrations which are going from RDS to NoSQL, and the reason for that is pretty simple. NoSQL is much cheaper and much more faster. And of course, we don't have limits on the amount of data what you want to go ahead and save. And I'll give you a reason behind it. So let's just go ahead and try to understand the architecture. So when you talk about the architecture part, let's just go ahead and talk about the architecture for RDS. And then we'll talk about the architecture for NoSQL. And this will help us understand why NoSQL is a better candidate in today's world when you talk about the applications wherein the amount of data is huge, right? Now, when you talk about RDS, we talk about an EC2 instance, right? Now, how cloud works is that this EC2 instance is stored in a shared storage, which in case of Amazon, it's called EBS, which is my elastic block storage, right? Now, on top of this, of course, we have an operating system. So on top of this, I will go ahead and deploy my database app, which can be MySQL, which can be SQL, which can be Oracle, which can be DB2. And then on top of this, like I said, I go ahead and deploy my databases. Now, the idea is this operating system will take some resources. This will take some resources. This will take some resources. And of course, end of day, this will be needing more resources because we have an underlying layer which is taking a lot of resources. So when I say a lot of resources, I mean CPU, I mean memory, and of course, I mean my IOPS or my storage, right? Now, on the other hand, when you talk about my NoSQL database, I talk about my storage, right? And the information is directly saved on the storage in a key value pair in the form of a table, right? So in other words, this will directly interact with the storage. We don't have these all layers in between. So this makes it much more lighter. This makes it, again, we talk about it does have a huge capacity to go ahead and save the information. Then we talk about we can go ahead and kind of use this for, let's say, fetching the information much more faster because we don't have the underlying layers, right? Now, there are a few benefits to my RDS. RDS has a schema. This does not have any schema. So in other words, my application server interacts with this layer, and this layer is responsible for saving the information in this. Whereas on this one, the application layer has to actually go ahead and save the information itself directly on the database. So in other words, when you go ahead and use a NoSQL database, my application has to have a logic in place wherein in this case, my application does not have to worry about the logic part because I have a layer which has a logic which can understand everything. But then there are a lot of benefits. This is much more cheaper. We don't have any operating system license cost. We don't have any EC2 instance cost. We don't have any database cost. So that's why this makes it cheaper. This makes it better. And a lot of people are now moving to a NoSQL database. So when you talk about my NoSQL database and when you talk about RDS, Amazon has RDS and Amazon supports NoSQL database. That's called my DynamoDB. For RDS, like I mentioned before, we have 6 different databases which are supported, right? So we'll talk about that as we go on. Now let's just go ahead and move to the slide. This was my basic. I want to explain you where exactly my RDS falls. That was the first thing which we wanted to understand. And the second thing is the type of databases what we have in AWS and what all things are supported, what all things are not supported, right? Now let's just go back and try to see a few things from my slide. Now first things first, this is my definition of my RDS. So when you talk about the definition, it's more like a fully managed relational database service. This provisions new instances in few minutes and scales vertically with a few mouse clicks. Now let's just go ahead and try to understand this. So when you talk about RDS first of all is this service what I talked about, the PaaS service, right? Now, like I mentioned, we do not have access on this, we do not have access on this, we do not have access on this, we get access on this one. So in other words, this is my Amazon's responsibility. So Amazon is responsible for going ahead and monitoring, or let's say backing up, or let's say blue screen errors. So it's basically their responsibility. They'll do everything. So it's a fully managed service, right? But at the same time, it's possible to go ahead and scale the size. So you know that we have some CPU, we have some memory in here, and we have some IOPS in here. Now, if I need more CPU, more memory, and more IOPS, what do? I go ahead and scale, right? Now, there are 2 different ways to go ahead and scale resources. So I'm not talking about Amazon, I'm talking about generally in cloud. So in general, we have vertical scale, and then we have horizontal scale. So when you talk about vertical scale, we talk about adding more CPU, or adding more memory, or adding more IOPS. When you talk about horizontal scale, we can go ahead and add more instances. Now you cannot just go ahead and add instances in case of database because you know we cannot have multiple read and write copies. But at the same time, you can go ahead and add more CPU, add more memory, and add more IOPS, right? So when you talk about this service, you can go ahead and scale. You can provision this in few minutes. And of course, we talk about this as my fully managed relational database service, what we talk about. Now, one important thing, like I said, the underlying layer is managed by AWS. Now, let me just go ahead and log into my AWS portal and show you how do we go ahead and provision this. For this, I'll just quickly stop sharing. I just need to go ahead and type in my password, which I need to copy from somewhere, because I don't remember so many passwords, you know, these days. So we'll talk about a few services from the portal itself, right? I'm just typing my password and then I will go ahead and share my screen because it will also send me a message alert that somebody's logged in from somewhere. Okay, let's go ahead and share the screen once again. Yeah, okay. I got a message that somebody logged in. So I'll just accept that. And this is how it looks like. So let's just talk about few services before we talk about provisioning this. So I talk about my RDS. This is my managed database service. This is what we are talking about in here. Like I said, it's a PaaS service. Now, first things first, one very important thing. AWS does not categorize the cloud in IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, right? So if you talk to someone in AWS, they'll say, no, we don't have a public cloud or a private cloud or a hybrid cloud. We don't have IaaS, we don't have PaaS, and we don't have SaaS, right? But then this is for our understanding, because when you go ahead and talk to Amazon, you'll hear a different story. So they'll say, no, we don't divide the cloud. But yes, we don't divide the cloud. We're just going ahead and understanding how things work. This is for our ease of understanding, right? Now, these days, they promote their own database, which is my Amazon Aurora, which is a MySQL and Postgre compatible enterprise class database starting at $1, which is like $30 for 1 month. And this supports replication. So we'll talk about replication. I just wanted to show you how the database looks like and how do you work with this, right? Now, if you want to go ahead and create database, you have an option to go ahead and create a database. So you can choose, do you want to go ahead and create a standard or easy create? So with standard, you'll have more questions. With easy create, you'll have best possible configuration and less number of questions. So I'm just showing you this as a quick demo before I move back to the slide. So I just wanted to talk about that it's easily provisioned, and then you can go ahead and scale based on your requirement. So you have 6 options like you did see in here. So I did mention that we have 6 options. So it supports my Aurora, it supports MySQL, MariaDB, then you have PostgreSQL, you have Oracle, you have Microsoft SQL. So whichever you want to go ahead and use, you can. So I'll not provision it, I'll just show it to you, and then we'll move back to the slide. And once I'm done with the slides, I'll go ahead and provision the database and show it to you. Okay, so we have a few features. Let's just go ahead and select MySQL because I just want to go ahead and use this. It will give me an option to go ahead and select the different versions what we have. So 5.7.28 is the most compatible one. This is the new one. So I'll just choose this one. And then you have a list of known issues and limitations. Now you see, we have a few templates. So you can choose this from production. So if you have a production, it will use my default values for high availability. Then you talk about my dev test and you have my free. So let's just go ahead and choose my free tier. Then you have my settings, you have my credentials using which you can go ahead and log into this. And then you have my password, my confirm password, and this talks about my size. So as I did mention that we have an EC2 instance, which is the underlying layer. So you see that this is the size what I have. So these are my options, but as I did choose a free tier, so I get micro, which is 1B CPU, 1 gig of memory, and this is not optimized or EBS optimized. I have more options if I choose, let's say, dev and test, right? So this is standard, memory optimized, bustable class. Then you have, if you need SSD or you don't need SSD, 20 gigs, there's the allocated space. Let me just actually go ahead and choose SQL and show you a few options because, you know, everybody works with SQL. Most of the people work with SQL. So this is something what we talk about. So this gives me an Express edition, standard edition. Then you have my SQL Enterprise edition, my web edition. So I'll go with the Express. These are the versions which are available. And then licenses included. So I'll go with the free tier. Database 1 is the identifier for this. Now let's just go ahead and type in the password and type in the password once again to go ahead and provision this. Then it says size, again, the same thing. We don't have much of option in here because we are choosing the free tier. It's not matching. So let me just go ahead and try once again. Okay, let me do it. Let me just change it. I need to go ahead and use I don't know. It says invalid password. Let it type in a few times. But anyways, now if you want to go ahead and connect this to VPC, you can. So basically, in other words, if you want to go ahead and secure this and you want to say that this should be accessible using a single network, you can go ahead and create a VPC, which is my virtual private cloud, which is nothing but my switch in the cloud. So you can go ahead and do that. Then you have the authentication options. These are the monthly cost, and then you can go ahead and create. I need to fix my password and of course complete the slide before I can talk about this. So as you see, it's fully managed relational database service. Amazon manages the underlying layer. You don't have to go ahead and manage this. You can provision instances in a few minutes and you can scale based on your requirement. Now, when you talk about this in general, when do we use this? And I think I don't need to go ahead and talk about when do we use this or how do we use this. We have been using these databases since long. It's been almost, like I said, 15, 20 years, maybe more since when we are using this. So we have Oracle, we have DB2 databases, which I am not sure how many years that is there in the market. So basically, when you talk about when do we use this, we can use this with our applications. A very good example of an application which uses my database, my database is my SharePoint. So if you have a SharePoint, you need to go ahead and use a RDS database, right? Then if you have an application, almost all the applications which you have in-house will either use MySQL, either they'll use the SQL server, what we have. Some applications use Oracle. A lot of workload which uses Oracle. But then these days, Oracle is something which we don't use much. So we kind of focus on SQL, MySQL, and NoSQL databases, which is my DynamoDB, which is out of scope, I should say, of this particular webinar, what we are doing. But yes, this is what we do. So there are a lot of applications which this can work with. So applications that have more complex data, applications which need to combine and join my data sets and require and enforce syntax rules. So basically the idea is this has schema, this has logic, and that's why we are able to go ahead and use this with more complex data, or maybe if you want to go ahead and combine and join my data sets, we can go ahead and use this. So there are a lot of reasons why we use this. And then again, like I gave you an example of SharePoint, I gave you an example of your on-prem application. There are many reasons to go ahead and go for RDS. If you have a bigger data set, let's say you want to go ahead and put in the analytics information, then you might like to go ahead and use what do you call NoSQL database. But if the amount of data is not that huge, then you might like to go ahead and use this. Now, you might have a question, when do we use my NoSQL database? And the answer to that question is pretty simple, straightforward. I'll give you an example of Amazon, right? So I'll give you an example of Amazon website I'm talking about, right? The amount of products, what they have is huge. The amount of data, what they have is huge, right? So if I start saving the information on a relational database, I think I'll be low on space, right? And that would not be able to give me that kind of performance which I'm looking for. So instead of going ahead and using my RDS, I would prefer using a NoSQL database, which is my DynamoDB in case of Amazon. Another example I can give you is eBay. So if you talk about eBay, I also can upload 2,000 items. You also can upload 2,000 items. Just imagine the amount of people we have on eBay and everybody uploading 2,000 items, right? So the amount of data over there is huge, which cannot fit in a relational database. So in that case, I will use a non-relational database. So these are a few use cases or scenarios what we talk about when we talk about RDS, when we talk about my NoSQL database. Now talking about my RDS, like I said, we have 6 types of databases which are supported. So it supports MySQL. It supports MariaDB. It supports Postgre. It supports Oracle. And the amount of data what we can store over there is 16 terabytes. So actually, this should be SQL. This should not be Postgre, right? And then we talk about Aurora for MySQL. Then you have my PostgreSQL. So the amount of data what you can store in here is 64 terabytes. This is huge, but then I would say that your application may not be able to go ahead and take this much load. So you will definitely have issues with the performance of your application when you talk about that you're storing this much amount of data on your relational databases. So I normally prefer to keep the relational database size small. I mean, small as in 4 terabyte, 5 terabytes is still okay. 6 terabyte is something what I've kept over there without any issues with the performance. But in case you have a huge amount of data, let's say 7 terabytes, 10 terabytes, so I prefer going ahead and keeping it on a SQL database. Sorry, a NoSQL database, right? So it's up to you. What do you want to go ahead and do that? Now, these are my use cases. So we talk about the RDS. This is a quick example of an application wherein I am having my users who are dumping the information in a bucket, which can be a S3 bucket. And then you have the data transformation, which basically is done using my RDS. Then I move my data, which is for the analysis in my data analytics. And then you have another set of data, which is kind of kept in the bucket. Right? So this is a very small, brief use case, I would say. Right? There are bigger use cases, what we can talk about. I gave you an example of Amazon. I gave you an example of, sorry, I gave you an example of my eBay. So these are two big use cases, what we talk about when we talk about my RDS, right? Now, let's just go back. Sorry, before I go back and move to the slides, sorry, the demo, I would like to go ahead and talk about the security part also, okay? Now, this talks about security controls for Amazon RDS. Now, first things first, how do you go ahead and secure the information? Now, there are a lot of ways in which you can secure the information, and encryption plays a very important role over there. Okay? Now, as we do not have access on the underlying layer, which is this one, so you can be rest assured that Amazon will take care of the security of the underlying layer for you. So you can be rest assured that the information which is there on EBS, so basically on my EC2, will be secured. It will be secured in terms of the network. It will be secured in terms of the underlying layer. So when they put it on EBS, you can be rest assured that it's secured, right? Now, what you have to do. So when you talk about a mixed responsibility security model, we talk about that you have a specific reason to go ahead and secure your part, and Amazon will have their own responsibility of going ahead and securing their environment. So in case of PaaS, let me just actually go back to one of the drawings which I made, this one. So the security of this part, let me just change the color actually. Responsibility of this part is Amazon. In case of this part, it's Amazon. In case of this part, it's Amazon. In case of this part, it's customer. In case of this part, it's customer. In case of this part, it's customer, right? So my database is in here, right? So it's a PaaS service. So end of day, it's a mixed responsibility, what we talk about. So Amazon also has to go ahead and secure the environment, and you also have to go ahead and work on the security part, that your databases and the data what you keep over there is secure, right? So when you talk about Amazon, of course, they'll take care of their part. Now, as far as your part is concerned, you need to make sure that the database can only be accessed from, let's say, known resources, or let's say from the machines which are there in your network, and you know that this connection is secure, right? So this is something what you are responsible for, and this is something where my VPC comes in picture, the one which I showed you when I was showing you the portal. So what I'm trying to say is, I have my database. I can go ahead and connect my VPC to this database. Now you have an EC2 instance, which has your application app1. So in order to go ahead and access this, it will go ahead and access the information like this. So this is more like an extra level of security, what we talk about when we talk about my RDS, which is a public service, which is a public PaaS service, right? Now let's just talk about a few more things for the security itself. So access to database itself, who has the visibility and can run actions on the database. You can configure a VPC, and this will add an extra level of security, because if you have a VPC connected, you will have only the resources connected to that VPC access my database. So again, there is nobody coming from the outside world to go ahead and access this information, right? Then you have encryption at rest and encryption at transit. Now, as this is a PaaS service, there are a lot of things which Amazon takes care of, right? One is automated backup. One is my snapshots, which can be configured along with my automated backup. Now, you can also go ahead and configure read replicas for this database if you have multiple regions and you have multiple deployments for your application, but these are just read replicas, right? Now, in this case, you can be rest assured that the information which is backed up, the snapshots which are being taken, and then of course the read replicas which are there, which are created across multiple regions, are all encrypted by default, right? So this is something which you need to know, and you can be rest assured that nobody will go ahead and take your information in case someone even gets access to your information, right? So there's a concept of encryption key, decryption key. I'll not go into that because it's more like, I would say, out of this session, because we are only talking about RDS. So anyways, so we talk about encryption at rest. By default is there. You don't need to worry about that. Encryption in transit. So when you are moving the information inside, out, or within the regions, let's say in case of replication, you can be rest assured that the information is encrypted, right? And then of course we have an SSL, which basically accompanies the information when you're going ahead and moving the information in and out the cloud. Then apart from this, you can also go ahead and set up events and notifications, which is basically important in case there's a problem with the RDS or there's a concern, security concern with RDS. So you can set up notifications and you can get emails on your email address in case there's a problem, right? Now, these are just few security controls what we talk about. There are much, much more controls what we can talk about as far as the Amazon security is concerned, right? So we'll just talk about this in brief. Now, talking about the migration options. Before I go ahead and talk about the migration option, let me just go ahead and move to one of my slides, which I created in here. Now, let's say you're running things in on-prem, right? And you plan to go ahead and move to the cloud. Now, when you move to the cloud, first things first, you need to go ahead and understand what all steps are involved in moving to the cloud, right? You cannot just go ahead and move your information to the cloud. You have to go ahead and understand if the information which you're moving to the cloud will work after you move the information to the cloud. So migration is something which involves a lot of different steps. So first things first, you understand that we need to go ahead and do an assessment. Now, in case of older applications, a lot of people actually go ahead and kind of use IP addresses, which was that time considered to be an okay practice. Now these days, we know that we have been using IP address, and when we do migration, IP address can be a challenge because I cannot just go ahead and move the application without changing the IP address. And when I change the IP address, I have an application server which is using the IP address of my database, which will break. So this is the reason we do an assessment, right? So assessment is the first phase when we talk about migration. Now, once my assessment is done, then there are two options which I need to go ahead and choose. Do you want to go ahead and move from, let's say, on-prem VM to Amazon EC2? Or do you want to go ahead and move to RDS, which is my managed relational database service? So in EC2, of course, you'll have to go ahead and deploy your SQL. And once you go ahead and deploy your SQL, then you need to configure your application to connect to the SQL database server. In RDS, you need to use your application and then connect to this RDS. So this is more of a lift and shift what we talk about. This is more like, I would say, I would call it rehost, and at times I would call it re-engineering or re-engineer. So in other words, you can move this VM to the cloud, which will now be available as an EC2 instance. So there are migration services, what we can talk about, we can use and then move it to the cloud. Second, you just move the data from the SQL database, what we have in here, to an RDS instance. Now, at times, your application may not understand just the instance, because there are a lot of services. Example I can give you is, if I'm using SQL and I'm using reporting services is something which is not available on RDS, which can only be available in here, right? So you might like to go ahead and re-engineer the application. If I have compatibility, if I don't have any issues with compatible database, or let's say compatible information, and then I can connect my application with my RDS, I can also go ahead and rehost, right? Now the question is, once you are done with the assessment, and once you are okay to understand that you're doing a lift and shift, you will do rehost or re-engineer, then how do you move your data to the cloud? So when you talk about how do you move your data to the cloud, the answer to that is pretty straightforward. You go ahead and choose between two options. One is a one-time migration, ongoing migration, which is in case you want to go ahead and backup. And there is a migration service from SQL, or let's say, I should not say SQL, but then Amazon, which can help you out with the migration of your data from on-prem to the cloud. So I will show you that as well. So I go back, let me just go to all services actually. So migration. So this is my database migration service, what we talk about. So when you talk about my database migration service, so this is what it talks about. So we have something called my schema conversion tool, and then this will go ahead and walk you through the migration process. So you can choose database to Amazon Web Services, or on-prem Oracle database to Aurora. So all these can be done, but of course, this is something which is big what we talk about, right? So I'm just giving you an idea on which service to use. And if you want to go ahead and create task, you can go ahead and create a task which talks about how do you go ahead and migrate to my Amazon environment, right? So this is my database migration service. And then of course, you can use this for migrating your databases, right? Now let's just go ahead and try to provision a database and see how this works. Let me just search RDS. And I'll show you DynamoDB also. So this is my DynamoDB, NoSQL database, manage NoSQL database, but we're just trying to talk about my RDS. So we'll try to provision an RDS and see how we work with this. Now let's just go ahead and try to provision a database. So if you want to go ahead and restore this, if you have dumped a database, so that's my export and import, what we do. You can do that from there. If you want to go ahead and change the region, you can do that from here. So I'll change it to mine, which is Singapore. And then I'll go ahead and provision my RDS in Singapore. So you see, 64 terabyte is what I had on my slide. So Singapore health is okay. Let's just go ahead and create a database. So I will go for easy create and I'll choose SQL and I'll use free tier, auto generate a password, easy for me. And then I can just go ahead and create. If you want to go ahead and see these settings, you can. So just go ahead and click on create. Okay, does not meet the zone requirement. We need to go ahead and add a subnet. Or let's just change this to okay. I think I need to go ahead and create a subnet. And for that, I would need to use a standard create. And I select this, I select the free tier. Okay, additional connectivity. So we create the DB subnet. So RDS will be publicly accessible or no? I think I will choose no. So this will create a subnet. Choose an existing network security group. So I'll choose default, or maybe I'll just go ahead and create a new one. So this is for my SQL database. Zone preference, I think I'll just go with this. Enable SQL authentication. Now let's just try to create it. Again, so there's a problem, I think. Maybe I'll just go ahead and create a new VPC. Let's try, because otherwise I'll have to. Yeah. So creating a new VPC works because I think I already created that for some test and it does not have a database for this. Now you see it's creating a database. Size is this, it's free version. VPC is this, which is the new one which I provisioned. So if I go to my VPCs, you'll see that this one is provisioned. So just copy the name and then you go to services and search for VPC. So this is my isolated cloud. So in Singapore, I have 3 VPCs now. 2 I might have created before. That's why it was not working. Right, so this is my test VPC. These are the other 2. This is the recent one which I created just now a while ago for the database. Now these are my subnets which are assigned to my VPCs. So again, so I'll not talk about VPC because we are here for a different purpose. So if I go to my RDS, now let's just go ahead and see how this works. Okay, so let's go to my databases and see. Okay, this is creating still. Now, once this is done, I can go in here and try to connect to this database. You have multiple options. You can schedule backups. You can go ahead and configure more options in here. Then you have logs and events. You can go ahead and configure my CloudWatch to go ahead and create alarms. And then based on that, it can go ahead and send you alerts. Then you have monitoring. So this is for the underlying layer, which is the VPC. which is the EC2 instance on which this database is provisioned. Then I have my tags, connectivity, and security, this is basically connected to this VPC, and this is the SQL DB security group which I created in order to go ahead and make sure that all the ports are blocked. Only and only port 1433 is open. These are my subnets. Okay, anyways, I just wanted to give you a quick demo. How do we go ahead and provision? This will take 1 or 2 minutes to go ahead and provision. Let's just quickly check. Yeah, okay, it's still creating. Refresh. Nope. Okay, anyways, so this is all we have for the day. A quick session on what is my RDS on AWS. Now, let me just stop sharing and talk about a few questions in case anyone has any questions or anything you want to go ahead and discuss, because we still have like 10 minutes. Like I said, so this is a small session, not very big one. So if you have any questions, we can go for questions and then we will just go ahead and wrap up for the day. How do you monitor your cost? Okay, so again, there are a lot of ways in which you can go ahead and do that. So first things first, you can go ahead and set up alerts based on your cost. So if you're aware of something called my CloudWatch, so CloudWatch can be used to go ahead and monitor your usage and cost, right? I'll send you a link, give me one quick second, which will help you out understand how do we go ahead and manage our cost. And of course, there's something called my budgets and my cost explorer. Okay, so this is the one what we have. CloudWatch is an additional cost. Yes, that is an additional cost. So I sent you a link in case you want to go ahead and make a note of that link. So that will help you out understand how does the cost work. Yeah, no problem. Okay, if nobody has any questions, I think, yeah, okay. If nobody has any questions, I'll move to, yeah, go ahead, over to you.
Thank you, Anuj. Thank you for the session, and I hope all the participants had a really good experience learning from the session. A request to all the participants that I have sent a Google form. It's a survey link for our session today. I would request each and every participant to fill the form where you will be including your email ID so that we'll be able to share the recording and all the necessary resource files which was mentioned in the lecture today. So yeah, thank you so much. And once again, thank you, Anuj. Thank you for such a great session.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe the channel. If you like the video, do give us a thumbs up and share it. Also check out amazing discounts and offers on our premium courses in the description below.